Ever wondered how medieval castles withstood sieges for months or even years? Have you considered what nightmares awaited attackers who dared to storm these stone fortresses? Number 12. The moat. More than just water. Did you know that castle moats weren't just filled with water? These wide, deep trenches surrounding castles served as the first line of defense against invaders. But medieval engineers didn't stop at simple water barriers. Some moats contained sharpened stakes hidden beneath murky waters, ready to impale unwary attackers. Others were designed to be filled with sewage and waste, creating not only a physical barrier, but a biological hazard. The castle of Caerphilly in Wales featured one of the largest moats in Britain, creating an artificial lake that completely surrounded the fortress. When attackers approached, they faced the unenviable choice of swimming through filthy, dangerous waters or constructing boats under fire from castle defenders. During sieges, moats prevented enemies from tunneling under walls, a common tactic for breaking into fortifications. They also kept siege towers and battering rams at a distance, rendering these weapons less effective. In winter, defenders would break ice that formed on moats to prevent enemies from walking across. Some castles, like Bodiam Castle in England, featured a moat system with controlled water levels. Defenders could raise or lower the water, depending on the threat, sometimes flooding surrounding lands to create marshes that bogged down approaching armies. In the scorching heat of Middle Eastern castle designs, dry moats serve the same purpose, without requiring precious water resources, often featuring steeper sides and greater depths to compensate for the lack of drowning hazards. Number 11. Murder holes. Death from above. Have you ever looked up while walking through a castle gateway? Those innocent-looking holes in the ceiling could rain down horror on medieval attackers. Murder holes, or meurtrières in French, were openings in the ceilings of gatehouses and passageways designed specifically for defenders to pour deadly substances onto enemies below. These architectural features appeared innocent enough, but turned entryways into death traps. When attackers breached the outer defenses and rushed into what seemed like a successful entry, defenders above would unleash boiling oil, scalding water, hot sand, or burning tar through these openings. The psychology behind murder holes was particularly effective. Attackers who saw comrades screaming in agony, covered in burning substances, often lost their nerve to continue. The narrow passages leading into castles forced attackers to bunch together, making them perfect targets. At Warwick Castle in England, the gatehouse features an impressive array of murder holes that could cover every inch of the entryway below. Not all murder holes delivered liquids. Some were designed for dropping rocks or shooting arrows down on tightly packed enemies. The Croix des Chevaliers in Syria, one of the most sophisticated crusader castles, featured murder holes in multiple layers of defenses, ensuring attackers faced these horrifying weapons repeatedly as they tried to progress deeper into the fortress. Even wooden castles incorporated murder holes, showing how universal this defensive feature became across different cultures and building materials. Number 10. Concentric castle design. The deadly maze. Did you know some castles were designed like deadly puzzles? Concentric castle designs featured multiple rings of walls, each higher than the one in front, creating a defensive masterpiece that confounded attackers. The concept originated in the Byzantine Empire, but reached its peak during the Crusades, when European castle builders encountered more sophisticated Eastern defensive architecture. Concentric castles turned the simple idea of a protected enclosure into a tactical nightmare for invaders. The genius of concentric design lay in its multiple layers. If attackers breached the outer wall, they'd find themselves trapped in a narrow space between walls called a death alley, or tilling ground. Here, they would be caught in crossfire from defenders on both the outer wall behind them and the higher inner wall in front of them. Arrows, crossbow bolts, and other projectiles would rain down from multiple directions, creating an inescapable storm of death. Beaumaris Castle in Wales represents one of the most perfect examples of concentric design, with 4 progressively higher lines of defense. Though never completed to its full plans, even in its unfinished state, it demonstrates how the design maximized defensive position. The psychological impact of facing a concentric castle cannot be overstated. Approaching armies would see not just one massive wall to overcome, but multiple barriers, each requiring separate sieges and strategies. At Carefully Castle, attackers who managed to breach the outer defenses would find themselves facing water defenses, then another full wall system, demoralizing even the most determined forces. The design was so effective that even modern military analysts study these structures for principles of defense that remain relevant today. The resources required to build concentric castles were enormous, making them symbols of wealth and power as much as defensive structures. Number 9. Drawbridges. More clever than you think. Ever considered how a simple wooden bridge could be a sophisticated defensive weapon? Drawbridges were engineering marvels that did far more than just span moats. These movable bridges connected the castle entrance to the outside world across the moat or ditch, controlled by chains or ropes attached to a windlass mechanism inside the gatehouse. When raised, they created an additional vertical barrier, reinforcing the gate itself. The mechanical aspects of drawbridges show remarkable medieval engineering. Counterweight systems allowed even massive bridges to be raised quickly by just a few defenders. Some advanced designs included splitting drawbridges, where the front portion raised while a rear section lowered inside the gatehouse, creating additional barriers. Bodiam Castle featured a complex system where the drawbridge's lifting chains passed through the mouth carvings of stone lions, combining intimidation with function. When attackers attempted to force a drawbridge down using grappling hooks, hidden mechanisms could be triggered to snap the ropes and send enemies plunging into the moat below. False drawbridges appeared in some castles, apparently solid structures that could be collapsed under the weight of attacking forces. These deadly traps sent entire groups of armored soldiers into moats or onto spikes below. The noise of a raising drawbridge served as an alarm system for the entire castle, alerting defenders to potential threats and triggering defensive preparations. In winter, drawbridge mechanisms required special maintenance to prevent freezing, showing how even weather considerations factored into medieval defensive design. Some larger castles featured multiple drawbridges at different entrances, allowing defenders to permit access at one point while maintaining security. At others, creating a sophisticated access control system centuries before modern security concepts. Number 8. Arrow loops. Deadly precision. Have you noticed those narrow slits in castle walls? They're not just for lighting or ventilation. Arrow loops, also called arrow slits or loopholes, were narrow vertical openings in castle walls that allowed archers to fire at attackers while remaining protected behind stone barriers. The design was a perfect example of asymmetric advantage. Defenders could see and target enemies, but attackers had extreme difficulty hitting the well-protected archers inside. The engineering of arrow loops evolved considerably over centuries. Early designs were simple vertical slits, but later versions included horizontal openings, creating a cross shape that allowed for greater targeting range while maintaining protection. Some castles featured arrow loops that widened on the inside, giving archers room to maneuver while presenting only a tiny target from outside. Dover Castle's arrow loops demonstrate how these defensive features were often positioned to create overlapping fields of fire, ensuring no approach route was safe from multiple angles of archer attack. Arrow loops weren't just for arrows, they adapted as weapons. Technology evolved. When crossbows gained popularity, loops were modified with wider horizontal openings to accommodate these more powerful but less maneuverable weapons. Later, with the advent of early firearms, gun loops appeared with circular openings for the wider barrels and to vent smoke. The psychological impact of arrow loops extended beyond their practical function. Approaching forces would see hundreds of these openings, never knowing which contained archers ready to fire, creating constant anxiety and uncertainty. At Caernarfon Castle in Wales, arrow loops were designed in distinctive shapes including crosses, keyholes, and even dumbbell forms, serving both defensive purposes and reflecting the builder's Christian symbolism. In Middle Eastern castles, arrow loops were often designed to account for the region's harsh sunlight, positioned to prevent archers from being blinded while maintaining their defensive function. The distribution of arrow loops throughout castle walls wasn't random. They concentrated around vulnerable areas like gates and corners, creating deadly zones where attackers would face the heaviest fire. Number 7. Machicolations, the stone teeth of death. Have you ever looked at the top of a castle wall and noticed those stone teeth hanging over the edge? Those projections aren't decorative, they're Machicolations, one of the most terrifying defensive features in medieval fortification design. These stone projections extended outward from the top of castle walls, featuring openings in the floor through which defenders could drop objects or pour liquids directly onto enemies attempting to scale or undermine the walls below. Machicolations solved a crucial defensive problem: the dead zone at the base of straight walls where defenders couldn't see or target enemies directly below. Before Machicolations, attackers could position themselves against walls to undermine foundations or set up scaling ladders with some protection from direct fire. These overhanging structures eliminated that safe zone, allowing defenders to target anyone touching the wall without exposing themselves to return fire. The psychological effect of seeing objects and liquids dropping from these openings, never knowing when or what might fall, created terror among attacking forces. At Château de Pierrefonds in France, Machicolations run the entire circumference of the castle, creating a continuous defensive ring with no safe approach to the walls. Some castles featured Machicolations only above vulnerable areas like gates and corners, concentrating defensive resources where they were most needed. Engineers designed drainage systems within Machicolations to quickly channel away rain that might otherwise make the defensive positions slippery and dangerous for defenders. The stone structures required sophisticated counterbalancing within the wall construction to support their weight while maintaining structural integrity. Touting the advanced engineering knowledge of medieval builders, the contents dropped through Machicolations went far beyond simple rocks or boiling water. Historical accounts mention quicklime, which would burn eyes and skin upon contact, beehives that would release angry swarms onto attackers, and even waste products that could cause infection and wounds. Some Mediterranean castles featured specially designed Machicolations with chutes angled to direct falling materials along specific paths, creating predictable impact zones where attackers would be most vulnerable. The development of these features demonstrated how defensive architecture continuously evolved in response to new siege tactics throughout the medieval period. Number 6. Bent entrances, the Ticule maze. Did you realize castle entrances were deliberately designed to confuse and trap attackers? Bent entrances, sometimes called Bailey gates or bent axis approaches, forced anyone entering a castle to make multiple 90-degree turns through a series of gatehouses and small courtyards before reaching the interior. This seemingly simple design feature created multiple tactical advantages for defenders and deadly challenges for anyone attempting to storm the castle. The primary purpose of bent entrances was to prevent battering rams from building momentum. A straight run would allow attackers to gain the speed and force needed to break through gates, but sharp turns made this impossible. These angular approaches also prevented cavalry charges from maintaining formation through the entrance, breaking up coordinated attacks. At the Tower of London, the entrance system forced attackers to make several turns while exposed to fire from multiple directions, each corner becoming a potential ambush point. Bent entrances created bottleneck where attackers would bunch together, making them vulnerable to arrows fired from arrow loops or objects dropped from murder holes above. The confined spaces prevented attackers from effectively using shields to protect themselves from attacks coming from multiple angles. Each turn in the passage could conceal portcullises or gates, allowing defenders to trap attackers between barriers and attack them from above with virtual impunity. The castle of the Teutonic Order in Malbork, Poland, features one of the most complex bent entrance systems, with multiple turns, portcullises, and defensive positions creating a nightmarish gauntlet for any attacking force. These entrances were designed to disorient attackers who managed to breach the outer gate. Coming from bright daylight into the relative darkness of the gateway passages, attackers would need time for their eyes to adjust. Time they didn't have as defenders unleashed attacks from prepared positions. Some bent entrances incorporated sudden changes in elevation, forcing attackers to navigate steps while in heavy armor and under attack, further disrupting their coordination. The psychological impact of fighting through these claustrophobic, trap-filled passages cannot be overstated, with each turn revealing new threats and no clear path to safety. Number 5. Portcullises, the teeth of the castle. Ever been trapped in an elevator? Now, imagine that elevator has spikes on the bottom and is designed to trap you for execution. Portcullises were heavy graded barriers typically made of wood, reinforced with iron, that slid vertically in grooves cut into gateway walls. Unlike doors that swung on hinges, these massive grates dropped quickly from above, operated by winch mechanisms that allowed just a few defenders to control these heavy barriers. The design of portcullises made them nearly impossible to breach quickly. Their grated pattern meant they couldn't be easily pushed or pulled open, and their weight required significant force to lift. Most castle entrances featured multiple portcullises spaced along the entry passage, creating a series of barriers that had to be overcome one after another. At Dover Castle, the main gateway contained 3 consecutive portcullises, each operating independently to create a sophisticated containment system. The space between 2 lowered portcullises became a trap where attackers could be contained and attacked from above through arrow slits and murder holes. The mechanical systems for raising and lowering portcullises demonstrated sophisticated medieval engineering. Counterweight systems similar to those used in drawbridges allowed these massive structures to be operated quickly in emergencies. Some designs incorporated emergency release mechanisms that could drop the grate instantly if attackers breached the outer defenses. The teeth at the bottom of many portcullises weren't just for intimidation. They were designed to impale anyone caught beneath when the grate dropped, and to make lifting the barrier even more difficult once lowered. Portcullises were often combined with massive wooden doors to create layered defenses. The doors would block visibility and arrows, while the portcullis provided a secondary barrier that remained effective even if the wooden doors were burned or broken. Evidence from some castles suggests defenders sometimes used partial deployment as a tactic, lowering portcullises just enough to prevent entry, but allowing defenders to attack through the grates at enemies trapped outside. The loud clanking sound of a dropping portcullis served as an alarm throughout the castle, alerting all defenders that an attack was underway and defensive positions should be manned immediately. Number 4. Battlements more than just castle crowns. Do you know why castle tops have that distinctive tooth-like pattern? Those alternating high and low sections of castle walls are called battlements, or more specifically crenellations, consisting of the raised portions, merlons, and the gaps between them, crenels. This design wasn't decorative. It represented one of the most practical defensive features in medieval architecture, allowing defenders to take cover behind the merlons while firing arrows or crossbow bolts through the crenels. The dimensions of battlements weren't standardized but carefully engineered to the weapons of the time and height of the average defender. Merlons were typically tall and wide enough to shield a standing man completely, while crenels were narrow enough to minimize exposure, but wide enough to allow effective firing angle. The top surfaces of merlons were often sloped to deflect incoming arrows upward, rather than allowing them to ricochet down onto the defenders behind them. At Conwy Castle in Wales, the battlements featured distinctive sloped tops that channeled away both arrows and rainwater, showing how practical considerations informed every aspect of design. Behind the battlements ran the wall, walk, or allure, a pathway that allowed defenders to move quickly along the wall to reinforce areas under heavier attack. These pathways needed to be wide enough for armored men to pass each other while running in opposite directions, showing how defensive architecture accommodated tactical movement requirements. Some castles featured hoarding or brattices, wooden extensions that projected outward from the stone battlements, creating additional fighting platforms with holes in the floor, similar to Machicolations. These wooden structures could be quickly assembled during sieges to enhance defensive capabilities. The patterns of crenellations sometimes carried symbolic significance beyond their defensive function. In some regions, straight-topped merlons indicated royal ownership, while swallow-tailed or dove-tailed patterns might indicate specific noble families or church ownership. Special firing platforms, called bartizans, often projected from corners of the battlement system, eliminating potential blind spots and allowing defenders to fire along the length of walls from protected positions. Winter considerations led some northern European castles to incorporate covered sections of battlements, protecting defenders from exposure, while maintaining defensive capabilities during harsh weather. Number 3. Hot sand. The unexpected weapon. Did you know that simple sand could become one of the most agonizing weapons in a castle's arsenal? Hot sand might seem less intimidating than boiling oil or molten lead, but it was actually one of the most effective substances castle defenders could deploy against attackers. When heated to extreme temperatures, sand could be poured through murder holes or machicolations onto enemies below, with devastating effects that went far beyond initial burns. Unlike liquids that might run off armor, hot sand found its way into every gap joint and opening in an attacker's protective gear. Once inside armor, the sand would continue burning skin long after the initial contact, causing excruciating pain that could incapacitate even the most determined soldiers. Sand was also significantly more available and cheaper than oil or lead, making it a practical choice for extended sieges when resources might become scarce. Evidence from Bodiam Castle suggests special heating chambers near defensive positions where sand could be quickly prepared when attacks began. The tactical use of sand showed sophisticated understanding of human physiology by medieval defenders. When poured on exposed skin, hot sand caused severe burns, but its real effectiveness came when it got into eyes. Temporary or permanent blindness would immediately remove attackers from the fight, creating chaos in tightly packed assault formations. Castle defenders preferred sand of specific grain sizes, not so fine that it would blow away before hitting targets, but not so coarse that it wouldn't penetrate armor gaps effectively. Some castles maintained dedicated sand stores near defensive positions, sometimes mixed with other irritants like crushed peppers or quicklime to enhance its effects. The versatility of sand as a weapon extended beyond direct attacks. Heated sand spread on stairways or ramparts made surfaces almost impossible to climb without severe burns to hands and feet. In Middle Eastern castle designs, where sand was abundant, special chutes were sometimes constructed to direct this material precisely onto the most likely approach paths. The psychological effect of seeing comrades writhing in agony, desperately trying to remove superheated sand from inside their armor, often broke the morale of attacking forces more effectively than deadlier but quicker methods of killing. Number 2. Pit traps, hidden death underfoot. Have you ever considered what might be beneath your feet when walking through a medieval castle? Pit traps, concealed holes with deadly contents, were among the most feared defensive features in medieval fortifications. These hidden hazards turned solid-seeming floors into death traps for unwary invaders, often placed in entrance passageways, courtyards, and along the most likely paths attackers would take. The design of pit traps evolved from simple covered holes to sophisticated mechanical systems. Basic versions consisted of deep pits covered with thin wooden planks and camouflaged with straw or rushes, materials that would look normal on a medieval castle floor but would break under the weight of armored men. More advanced designs included trapdoors with triggering mechanisms that could be activated by defenders when enemies reached specific positions. The renowned Chateau Gaillard, built by Richard the Lionheart, featured false floors and passages that could be collapsed remotely, sending entire groups of attackers into prepared pits below. What waited at the bottom of these pits went beyond the simple danger of falling. Many contained sharpened stakes positioned to impale falling victims, while others held water deep enough to drown men weighted down by heavy armor. Some of the most sophisticated pit traps had angled sides that made climbing out impossible, creating containment areas where trapped attackers could be dealt with at leisure by defenders. Archaeological evidence from some castle sites suggests pits that contained quicklime or other caustic substances that would burn victims who fell in, adding chemical injury to the physical trauma of the fall. The psychological effect of pit traps extended beyond their direct victims. Attacking forces that witnessed comrades disappearing suddenly through the floor became hesitant and slow-moving, testing each step and losing the momentum crucial for successful assaults. Some castles incorporated multiple layers of false floors that would give way seamlessly, creating a terrifying experience where survivors of the first collapse would find themselves falling again just as they thought they had reached safety. The maintenance of pit traps required significant attention, as wooden components needed regular replacement to ensure they would break predictably under weight while remaining strong enough to support their camouflage materials during normal times. Number 1. Garderobes, the deadly toilet chutes. Would you believe that medieval toilets doubled as defensive weapons? Garderobes, the castle toilets, consisted of small rooms containing stone or wooden seats with holes opening to chutes that projected from the castle walls. These waste disposal systems served their obvious primary purpose, but also created unexpected defensive advantages that castle designers were quick to exploit. The most direct defensive application of garderobes came during sieges, when the waste-filled chutes became ready-made positions for dropping unpleasant substances on attackers below. Unlike purpose-built murder holes, garderobe chutes already contained accumulated waste matter that could cause infection in open wounds. Some castle designs deliberately positioned garderobes above likely scaling points or near the base of walls where sappers might work to undermine foundations. At Chepstow Castle in Wales, several garderobes were strategically placed along the curtain wall facing the most likely direction of attack, suggesting defensive considerations influenced even toilet placement. Beyond their use as weapons, garderobes created significant psychological deterrence. The smell and visible evidence of waste materials discouraged attackers from positioning themselves beneath these projections, effectively denying access to portions of the wall without requiring active defense. Some castle designers took this concept further, creating false garderobes with no actual toilet function that existed purely to extend this zone of psychological deterrence. The accumulated waste material at the base of castle walls from garderobes created slippery, disease-ridden areas that attackers would be reluctant to cross, effectively extending the defensive perimeter. The engineering of garderobes shows sophisticated understanding of both sanitation and defense. Chutes were often designed with smooth internal surfaces to prevent waste buildup and reduce odor inside the castle, while some featured water-flushing systems drawn from rainwater collection. Dover Castle contained garderobes with chutes that emptied into the moat, combining waste disposal with moat contamination that would deter swimming attackers. During peacetime, Garderobe waste would sometimes be collected for use as fertilizer or in tanning processes, showing how medieval castle systems integrated practical functions across different aspects of life. Do you think modern buildings still incorporate defensive features inspired by these medieval innovations, hiding in plain sight within contemporary architecture?